Guys, welcome back to You and Wellness, the space where we explore what it really means to be well from the inside out. I am your host, Kern Roberts. Today's episode is a raw one, a thought-provoking one, and a grounding one at that. I'm joined by Troy Hadeed, an author, yogi, and above all else, a present and intentional human being. As we dive into what yoga truly is and how it connects with your everyday life and why wellness isn't something you do, it is something you live. So, wherever you are, take a breath, open your heart, and let's get into it. Troy, thank you for being here.
Yeah, love, give thanks.
Welcome. Pleasure to have you on the set, man.
Love.
Pleasure to have you on the set. Yeah? Listen to me, man. I mean, when we first said, Troy, let me do this thing, I was really happy that you just jumped at the opportunity and you said, you know what, hey, we're going to do this, and you just let me know. And I'm really glad for your openness,
Yeah. Well, the invitation, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, man. Good.
Yeah.
So let the people on them know now, who is Troy Hadeed?
I have no clue. I am, and that's it. That's the truth, but it's like I still figuring it out. Like we all figuring it out because. So Troy Hadeed is somebody who's still figuring it out.
Yeah,
and what I have done. I like to play with language. Who am I? I don't know.
Gotcha.
What do I do? What have I done? I've been teaching yoga for about 20 years. Before that, I owned a retail store. People might know as Mystic Hemp. Way back in the used to sell clothing and cosmetics and stuff made from cannabis. And we still have a yoga studio and teach yoga. I just released a book about 2 years ago. Do some corporate speaking. But in a nutshell, who is Troy Hadeed? He is somebody who would like to believe that every day for the rest of his life, he will get up and do everything he can to make the world a better place, to be a better human being, to help people deepen their relationship to their understanding of God, and help us all kind of remember who we are and what it means to love.
So, at your stage in life, I mean, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking? Can I ask that?
Timeless. 45.
So is it okay at that age to be like, I'm still discovering myself? People are like, yeah, man, you should know who you are, and you should know which direction you're going in, and you should know, this is what's happening, and da 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 da.
If somebody tells me they know who they are, that's a red flag. That's a red flag to me. Because that means that whether it be spiritually, mentally, emotionally, means you're done. You reach, right? I ain't reach.
We journey.
I ain't reach. We learning. Every day we learning. We learning about human experience. We learning about God. We learning about human psyche, relationships, all of it. We're constantly learning. So I don't believe I will ever have human experience figured out, far less have myself figured out. And I really do connect to your understanding. Sorry, let me rephrase. I know that I am not my physical body, that we are spirits or souls put into a body, seeds of God, I like to explain it, placed in this body, and this body is given a name.
Yeah.
But if I were to ask you, Kern, do you connect to some existence after you leave your body? And you tell me yes, well then guess what? Then that means you're not your body.
Interesting.
See what I'm saying?
I see where you're going.
So that's why if somebody tell me they have it figured out or they know themselves, that's a flag for me. We have to sit down and have a convo.
Yeah, conversation. So how you started on this journey, man? What was your upbringing like, and how you started?
I grew up in a Catholic home, and it's so important as well to say, Kern, like, I think it's so important to own your privilege. And I grew up in a comfortable home. I wouldn't say we had all the money and riches and stuff in the world, but I grew up comfortable. And in a Catholic home, I have 2 older brothers. I'm 7 years the youngest. In my book, I say that I grew up with a mom I could call a saint. She's such a beautiful woman. And I remember from a really young age, I had a few idols from really young. One was Jesus Christ. One was Bob Marley. And I idolized these individuals and all they represented. And to me, a lot of what they represented kind of meshed and crossed in so many ways. And I talk in 7 years old, you know, I was a kid and I really idolized this. And I remember at 10 years old, I wrote a letter to the editor and it was published in the newspaper.
Yeah.
And a copy was sent to President Bush, Saddam Hussein, Mikhail Gorbachev. And I assume if my mom helped me do that, but it was a letter that was written, that's when the Gulf War was going on, to try and plead for an end to war and environmental crisis oncoming. How I knew about that stuff growing up, I don't know. I think it's from watching news with my dad every afternoon. But I often ask my mom why. What drove a 10-year-old boy to do that? And to bring it back full circle, I think I recognize that, in other words, to who much is given, much is expected. And when one recognizes their privilege, and sure, I'm white-skinned, I'm light and male, I come from a relatively comfortable family, but to me, biggest privilege of all is love and security. It's growing up in a community and a family and knowing what love is, knowing what security is. And I think at a young age, I recognized that I had so much of these privileges, even though back then I probably didn't have a name for it, that I felt a sense of responsibility to at least try my best to make a difference in the world, you know.
And those privileges are things that, you know, you find that other people did not have. That love and security and that sense of comfort. A lot of families around that time didn't grow up with that.
Yeah,
even now actually. Yeah.
And even when some people grow up with comfortable lifestyles and have everything they could ever dream of having, sometimes there's still that lack of element of emotional security and safety and love. You know, I mean, everybody has a different definition of what love is to them.
And we will get into that. But that's what you classify in terms as privilege. That emotional security, that comfort, that lifestyle, that's what you...
Well, that is my greatest privilege.
Right.
You know, I have many privileges, like I said, you know, and I will gratefully own them all, you know, whether...
Why you call that a privilege, though?
Well...
Why that word?
Privilege is advantage. So if you really look at privilege is advantage. And when I was much younger, I think I looked at privilege as a bad word, you know, something to be ashamed of. And I no longer see it that way. I think that might be a social narrative, or maybe that was my understanding back then. But a privilege is advantage, and we all have advantages, right? Whether somebody is born into it or works their way into it, it's still a privilege, even if you earned it. And, you know, there's a quote, privilege is blind to those who have it.
Facts.
You know, and I think it's easy for me to say that I don't have advantage because I'm not on the other end of it, right? But for me to really understand my privilege, all of them, having a cell phone is a privilege. Being able to read is a privilege. Having a vehicle is a privilege, right? For me to really understand the benefits of my advantages or privileges, I have to explore the experiences of those on the other side of that. I think that's a lesson in it for all of us, because I believe we all have an advantage over somebody.
Seen.
You know, there's always somebody in a situation that is less fortunate than we are in some way, you know?
Yeah. Some people would say, but Troy, you're Hadeed is at 1%. Why must I listen to you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, they don't have to listen to me.
How did you put yourself in that position to experience somebody without that kind of privilege?
Well, I have some very dear friends who hold my hand along that journey sometimes. And it's about having real heartfelt conversations. Real heart-to-heart conversations. Because I used to be ashamed of my privilege growing up. And what I mean by that is I felt ashamed that I was born into circumstances or situations that others weren't. But get this, as long as I am ashamed of my privilege, it could only benefit me and my inner circle.
True.
Right?
True.
But if I'm willing to say, all right, I have advantages and privileges, now I could at least begin to have conversations and to see, all right, how might I be able to have an impact or use my privileges to my advantages to benefit something or larger than myself, to start to serve something larger than my own personal wants, needs, and desires. Because I don't believe that there's anything to be ashamed of by being born into privilege or even making a way into privilege. I think acknowledging those privileges and then deciding, all right, how can I use this to serve something other than myself? You know, I think something we have to realize, all of us, is that this is a human experience. And like I just said, nobody has it figured out, you know, Brad. We all come here to learn and grow. And we will all make mistakes. And sometimes we will all get our head up our ass. Don't know if I could curse on the show, but
I think that might be the first one.
all of us follow.
Yeah.
So why are we often shame so many things, and you know, we want accountability. We want accountability, but then when somebody takes accountability, we hang them, and we chastise them, and we cancel them. That should be applauded. We should make accountability more accessible to people. Because the fact is that none of us have it figured out.
I see. I understand. Well, that level of consciousness, that mental consciousness, maturity in mental consciousness that you possess at that age, that's something that is not really seen now or within a lot of people, in fact. Yeah. And so you credit that to your mother and father and their exposure.
My mom and dad had a lot to do with it, my family in general, because even though, you know, as I started to grow up, I wasn't really conventional and I was kind of out of the box, right? But I've always known that love and support. That love and support was never withdrawn from me. But I think what had a massive influence on my upbringing was, I would say, my obsession with this man called Christ and this man called Bob Marley. And I think while it might sound cliche for a privileged little 7-8-year-old to be obsessed with Bob Marley, it was a little bit different because he exposed me to a reality outside of my reality.
I understand.
And my bubble.
Yeah.
And I also think, you know, I remember watching news with my father every afternoon at 7 p.m., like clockwork, sitting on in between my mom and my dad and my brother, who are a little older, and watching news every afternoon, you know. And I now have so many friends that would not let their kids watch the news and don't want their kids to know what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
And I have no kids myself at the moment, so who am I to question that? But I do think that had a lot to do with me kind of dialing in to what was happening outside my bubble, you know?
Yeah. I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So how did yoga come into the mix now?
Well, I was introduced to yoga at 14 years old. And it's actually a really beautiful story. I'll kind of tell it backwards, right? About a year before COVID, I was teaching at a yoga festival in Slovakia. And I was asked a question I've been asked for over 15 years at that point, and it's, how do you find yoga? I always say that yoga kind of found me. And I talk about a teacher called Mr. Hadeed, who used to teach at Fatima College. And I remember I used to go up every lunchtime, and he would give me these books to read. I would give up my lunchtime and go upstairs. He would give me these books to read. Friends would make fun of me for giving up lunchtime to go and read these books. And in Slovakia, at that festival, I said, I really wish I could one day meet Mr. Hadeed again and tell him how he may have influenced my life, because the very first book he gave me was a text on yoga. That was my first influence of yoga. So I come back from Slovakia, and about a week later, I get this message in my email, in my inbox. It was a comment from my website, which normally goes to junk. And it said, I think I gave you the practice of Brahmacharya to read in 1994, Fatima College, signed S. Hadeed. I was like, what? So I replied to him, I said, Mr. Hadeed, I have to speak to you, send me your number. So he sent me his number, we had a convo, and he got his story straight for me. He said, first of all, call me Sylvan, don't call me Mr. Hadeed, you're 40 years old. He said, let me get your story straight for you. You were sent to detention.
Shit.
He said, that's how you first came in my room, is you were sent to detention.
Funny he remember that though.
Yeah. Well, here's the next part. He says, and let me tell you something else. He said, you say you've been talking about me for the last 15 years as influencing your life and possibly introducing you to yoga. He says, well, I've been talking about you for the last 25. As a 14-year-old kid who came into that room in detention and came every day of his own free will, came to detention to read more and read more and read more and read texts and books that most adults wouldn't even read. He said, I have been talking about you as a 14-year-old kid who had an impact on my life.
Wow.
He said, so look at the synchronicity in that. We haven't had a word in over 25 years. I had no idea what had come of your life. You had no idea what had come of mine. He said, but let me tell you how I found you. I now teach in Ontario, Canada. And I was telling my class about this 14-year-old boy called Troy Hadeed. And they Googled your name and pulled up your website. And that's how he found me to reach out and message.
Wow.
So would I have found yoga otherwise? Maybe. But that's how it all went down, and then I graduated from university at 21. I came home and people would say, well, what are you going to do with your life? I say, well, I'm going to teach yoga. And they would say, well, do you do yoga? I'd be like, no. But I knew I was going to teach yoga,
So wellness. How does yoga and wellness intersect with each other? Before you even get there, what is your definition of wellness? Do you have a definition of wellness?
I never really thought about it, to be honest. But I think, I think wellness would just be living a life where we could serve something bigger than ourselves. To me, that would be wellness. Because if we talk of wellness in a physical sense, that's cool, but me and you only have one certainty, and that is death.
Facts.
Right? That's facts. So if to me wellness is, how can I serve something bigger than myself? Because it's impossible for Troy and Kern to leave this table as the same people that sat down on this table. So if I start to look at my wellness as a resonance and vibration with which I live my life, and the impact I have on the people around me, that wellness and that resonance never dies. Because I live in all of their conversations and their experiences, and you now live in mine. To me, that is ultimate wellness. However, to be able to show up in the world in that way, we also physically have to be well. Mentally, emotionally, we have to be well. Spiritually, we have to be well to really tune into the resonance and vibration of our lives. So I think there's so many elements to wellness.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Love. Because you mentioned love quite a bit.
Yeah, all the time. And the truth is that a lot of people throw around the word love. It's a I wouldn't say it's a cliche, but they have so many different kinds of love, right? In my book alone, I say love 300 times, and I don't even mention chocolate, Indian food, or wine.
Wow.
Follow?
Mm-hmm.
So they have all kind of different kinds of love. For me, and I remember when I wrote in the first draft, I wrote this line in the book, and it was towards the end of the book, if not the very last line at that point in time. And I remember when tears came down my eyes, because that's when it hit for me and it really landed. And to me, to love somebody is essentially to see God in the eyes of every human being, and then to act accordingly. So it's not just to say I acknowledge God, but it's to see God in the eyes of every human being in all of creation, and then to be a mirror, so that God could be in awe of his own creation.
So God.
Yeah.
How has God / Jesus Christ played
Yeah.
an influence in your life? So
Yeah.
we understand what Bob Marley has done.
Yeah.
We understand what yoga has done. We understand what wellness is. We understand what love is. What has God and Jesus Christ done for you?
Yeah. Well, they are, to me, God is God, and somebody can truly believe and have a depth of relationship to God, but in my opinion, not associate or connect to Jesus Christ in that way, right? So to me, those are two different things. And the way I view Christ is very different to what one might assume, because it's very different to what is presented within a box of traditional religion or within a Catholic Church or so on. Christ is my greatest teacher. And he's my greatest teacher of all. I think he's the greatest yogi that ever walked the planet. And he is, to me, my understanding of a true embodiment of what love is. A real embodiment, an example of what it means to love one another. God, for me, is, I encourage people to redefine God, because I've seen so many people move away from God because of their experiences within a church or within organized religion. Sometimes you say with God and you see people twitch, right? Or they want to run out the door. And
Get very angry.
yeah. And I would invite people to redefine, take back that relationship to God. Call God whatever you like. God don't have an ego. He ain't really business. To say that God or divine intelligence is bothered by what we say he looks like, come on. He ain't no ego. He ain't bothered. But it's just about connecting to a divine agency, a divine intelligence that moves through all of life and every human being that we are in service to. To me, every individual has a right to redefine their own personal relationship to God. And if that is within organized religion and within a church, beautiful. If that's through Jesus Christ, amazing. But if that is through Hanuman, Krishna, Shiva, Allah, Muhammad, then who is to say? Who am I to try to define someone else's relationship to God? And I think, just to put a pin here, I think this is where a lot of us have gone wrong. Because you can be told, if I have a fruit, I can tell you of the taste of the fruit, but you will never really know it unless you taste it yourself. And I think for a lot of us, we have been told of God, and we have been told what God wants and what God looks like and what God would have said. But that's very different from knowing God. And I think when you spend any time to come to cultivate a relationship with God and come to know God, you begin to realize there's a difference between being told of God and knowing God through experience.
Yeah, that's true, man. Okay. No argument there. None. So, yoga back then and yoga now, how has that transitioned your life? Or how does that improved, helped you shape who you are today?
Yeah, man, in every way. I can't. It's hard to even list in every way. I mean, even Physically, at 45, I'm stronger, more able, and fitter than I ever could have dreamed of being. Stronger now than when I was in my 20s, for sure. More fitter, leaner, more able. And so physically, that alone is huge. Mentally, emotionally, a lot more clear-minded. I describe one of the very first teachings of yoga says yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. And it says yoga is the quieting of the fluctuations of your mind. And I think for so many people, they're at war with themselves, they're at war with their mind. They can't sit still. Even if they physically sit still, the mind can't stop, right? And I always say, how can we ever have a world or society at peace if the people within that society aren't at peace with themselves?
Yeah.
So I think cultivating a relationship with the mind is so important. And, I think as Psalms 46, be still and know that I am God. So that has also now led to deepening my own spiritual life, my relationship to God, because I believe that when you start to quiet your mind, which is what the practice of yoga does for us, that in that stillness you could begin to sit, and whatever your understanding of God is, whatever that looks like for you, there's a space there in which it really can take someone, help them deepen that relationship. So I think in so many ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that the practice of yoga has made me who I am in the last 20 years.
Is quieting your mind likened to meditation?
Could be.
Or is it different?
Yeah, it could be. Again, like love and God, people have different definitions of meditation. For me, absolutely. Even though there are many different approaches to meditation, here's how I like to describe it. Imagine your mind and your breath actually are like eternal lovers. They're eternal partners. Or maybe like your little children, right? And imagine that there's no separation or divorce. So you are with these partners. These are your ride or dies. You can't escape them. You can't escape your mind. You can't escape your breath. We have to recognize we're not on the same team. We're not on separate teams. We're not on separate teams. And this applies to everything, which means that if we have an issue in our society or in a relationship, I need to understand your experience and what you went through and what you're going through. And you also need to understand mine. I have this beautiful tattoo on my hand that says, ignore his story and see his soul. All of us have a story, and that story is all assumption, right? And if I always judging you, and you always judging me, well, then we building walls, and we can't really cross to get to know each other and understand, because here's the reality, we probably have a lot more in common than you think.
Wow.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
We have a lot more in common. And I believe that, when it comes to privilege, and it's like if you keep shaming somebody for their privilege, you're building up walls, and nobody's going to feel safe enough to look at their privilege and to own their privilege and see how they can use that to serve something bigger. Right? To have somebody actually look at their privilege, see what it has allowed them, what those benefits are. Well, you have to make it a safe space for them to do that as well. And we need to recognize that we're not on different teams. We're on the same team. And regardless of what that privilege is or what you feel is dividing you with somebody else. I have one of my favorite lines in the book says that our conversations have the potential to dissolve the illusion of our differences.
That's true.
And they will. Heart-to-heart conversations. Not a conversation where I try to prove a point and make you wrong or trying to make myself right. A conversation where I hold my heart in my hands. And I say, yo, let's have a heart-to-heart convo. I want to know you. And I want you to know me.
Yeah.
And in doing that, we dissolve the differences, and we come to realize that maybe there's a way forward for us. because I know there is a way forward for us all.
But there are a lot of people who don't want to have that conversation,
Yeah.
and out of spite, out of greed, out of just don't want other people to know how to achieve that privilege. It's just like, you stay there, there's them and there's us.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do? What do you say to that?
Well, I think the whole world is plagued by that right now. And that's kind of why I call the book what I call the book, because this could be a whole next 4-hour podcast, but it's what I call the human identity crisis, right? Because as long as I identify with my body, then all the things that revolve around my individual identity and my body, I see as part of my identity. Mm-hmm. Race, religion, career, opinions, ideologies, lifestyle. So anytime you do anything to challenge or threaten any of those layers of my identity, then guess what? I take it personally. And I feel like it's an attack, and we're on different teams. And that's part of the problem, is that all these things have become part of our identities. Down to sexual orientation, everything is part of our identity. So in this book, I decided I could only identify with one thing. That is love. Because that's the one thing that can make me and you the same.
Penetrate all identities.
All identity.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I identify with. So to answer your question, yes. People get really, when you start to speak to them about their lifestyles or the way they live in or their opinions or their religion, they feel like they're being attacked because we are so attached to this identity, right? But get this, the second I begin to recognize that I am not my physical body, then I also realize I am not my identity, which means I take things a lot less personally. And when I really begin to understand that, then hear me carefully, Kuhn. Forgiveness is no longer an option. It is inevitable.
Inevitable, yeah.
Inevitable.
Yeah.
Because I no longer see you as an individual attacking me, because I am not my body and you're not your body. What I see instead is a seed of God with a bag of conditioning. And if somebody does or says something to me, that is their conditioning doing it to my body. But it's not personal.
I get you.
Get it?
Yeah,
so it's more like me and you just here walking each other home. So let's dance, because we're on the same team.
That's like taking your consciousness to a third level, a third person level, and just like, don't look at the insult that the person is actually bringing or doing to you. Yeah, look at them as somebody who probably needs a little bit of work, conditioning, a little bit of broken in that area. Don't take it too personally. Just work with them and love them still, encompass them with love still, so that they'll be able to, deal with that person still.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Now here's the same thing, Kuhn, and you say that, and I remember another tattoo on my hand. I have not come to teach, I have come to love, and love will teach.
Bible calls that agape love, boy. That's what that is.
I heard that just here today. I heard that agape. I heard that term, I think it was just yesterday. But now get this too. If I realize that somebody is acting in a way that I consider out of alignment due to their conditioning or their experiences, I now have an opportunity to help them be part of their reconditioning, their reprogramming. But if I want to do that, the fastest way to doing that is to make somebody feel safe.
True.
Not judged.
Yeah.
And I think that if we, in our relationships and our society, begin to try to create an environment of safety where we could understand one another.
This society is a very judgmental one,
Yeah.
And we make judgments very quickly, Yeah. Breaking through that or teaching somebody to undo that, that's very difficult.
Yeah, huge. And you know what? A story that comes to mind is I remember driving on the road on North Coast. I said years ago, I tell a story in the book too, not to keep plugging the book, I know we'll get there. But, and I saw a guy toss a box of KFC out the window. And back then I had Mystic Hemp, so I was environmentalist, right?
Yeah.
And I got outraged. And I got vexed in my car driving. And then it's almost like something came over me. And I realized, well, two things. That individual may have never had someone to teach them and show them and guide them as to why taking care of the environment was even important. One, having someone to teach you and show you is a privilege. Not everyone has that. Secondly...
Hold on. Let that sink in just a little bit, Not everyone has that privilege, And if you think about some places in the world don't have schools, don't have teachers. What we take for granted as ABC and free education and whatnot, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
I remember coming across a ad recently on Facebook, and a group was trying to raise funds for menstrual pads. And I was just like, in my mind, I was just like, what? Wait, what? And it's like, I thought everybody has access to this thing, but looking at the entire video, I recognized that there was a cohort of people that just did not have access to that, did not know about how to deal with that, and ways in which that different technologies have advanced in managing menstrual cycles and whatnot. And that was just one aspect. And I was like, so wait, going to the grocery and buying a pad or a tampon or something like that's a privilege to us. And I'm like, wow. Carry on.
And I'll add to that too. It's like, if I grew up in a home where every time I see conflict, I see cussing and carrying on and a volcano of eruptions, well, I growing up learning that as normal. So you might look at that person, an adult, and say, you're 40 years old, you should know better. He never had nobody to show him better. And a lot of the time we look at somebody and we point a finger and say, you should know better. But to know better, you had to have the people and the situations and the experiences to teach you and show you better.
At what point do we move from, or do we cross over from unprivileged to privilege? Is there a crossover point?
Well, I think everybody's privileged in some way. And I know a lot of people going to hear that and be like, what? And want to react. In reality, dude, a privilege is an advantage. Watching news, all of us are privileged in some way. And all of us have advantages to recognize and to take account, not accountability, because nothing wrong in it, but to just acknowledge that maybe I know something somebody else don't know. Maybe I have something to offer, something to teach. Maybe my experience is a little different,
I think that right there is the crossover point from not knowing to actually knowing. That's when you become privileged, because now you're in a position or in a higher position than someone who doesn't know, so to speak. You're in a, come let me teach you. You don't know this? Oh, you don't know this, man.
So, so tell me if again you're wrong, in a position where you can now acknowledge that you have this advantage or this privilege. Or
hold it against them.
Yeah.
So like, you have a car, you have a manual car, the manual goes from 1 to 5, but the person who has the same manual car only knows it goes from 1 to 2. You are in a privileged position. It's like, you don't know that? I'm gonna leave it to which you 1 and 2. I ain't going all the way up to 5. There's just so many aspects of it. And I know when we think of it, we have the bigger labels of privilege. But what I'm speaking to as well is all of it. All of it. And just to go back to my KFC box drawing story, because I think that's a really good point that we need to acknowledge. Yeah, man.
And that is that The other thing that landed for me is that this individual throwing a box out the window. That a lot of time we want people to care for society and care for a larger collective. But we don't realize that that society and a larger collective never really cared for them. So in other words, might have an individual who's struggling to survive. He just paying his bills, he trying to put food on the table. He could barely see till next week. He feel like whether it be his family or his community or his government and his system never cared for him or looked out for him. Yet, I want to come and say he should take care of the environment for the next generation. The next generation, he can't even see till next week. You know, so a lot of time we want people to live in a way that considers the collective and society a collective that they have never felt they were a part of and never felt seen or cared for.
Why must I fight your fight?
Yeah.
When I trying to deal with today.
Exactly. And I think, again, that at that point for me was my privilege.
Yeah.
A blind of my privilege. Not realizing that, some people living day to day out here in our very own country. Who am I to show up and tell them they should live differently when they're struggling to see it past the next few days?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we in a society, we just had elections and the government change and cool, some things might change. But, I in this country 40 something years, Kane, and I didn't really see much change, And I think that's because, and I'm not saying the government can't make change, sure, they have to be part of that change, but so do we. Mm-hmm. And I think we as the people in this nation need to start to be more considerate, more compassionate, more caring, more understanding of each other and even absolute strangers,
That is not just a Trinidad thing, but that's a Caribbean thing and I dare say worldwide thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we don't care. We don't care about, what the government does. I mean, we would think that we care, but really and truly, government go, government come, we deal with us when the day comes. We handle us when the day comes. You know? And how do you speak to that? I mean, how do you speak to us building a community in such a way where love is the focus of it or the focal point of it, and allow people to benefit from that?
Yeah, so many answers to that.
Is that something that we could do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whether X amount percentage of viewers or listeners want to say we could do it or we can't do it, here's my question to you: how dare we not try? Mm-hmm. How dare we not try? Mm-hmm. Because to me, there are days when I want to walk away from that struggle, or just maybe go and live in the bush or go and live in the South Pacific somewhere. But that's how I work, and like Bob said after they shot him, he said the people who are trying to make your world worse are not taking a day off. So why should I? Mm-hmm. And I think for each one of us, we just need to every day realize that we get up and every, there's an environmentalist, Jane Goodall. She says, don't ask a question, can I change the world? Ask the question, how am I changing the world? Because every word, every action, every thought changes the world we live in every single day. Right? So if all of us show up every day and really begin to look at our impact on those around us, even the absolute stranger, right? Even the homeless man begging for food. I have the opportunity to make his day, to change his life. How dare I not do that? You know what gets in the way? The ego and the judgment. Love a man. You don't know what he went through. And I'm not saying I don't do that. I do that sometimes, and then I would walk off or drive off and be like, that was God. Deny God food. But to answer your question and bring it back to personal wellness, because I think that's important. Because for me to be able to show up from love in a place where I am not in fight or flight, I am not triggered, my body is not stressed. Because here's the thing, if I am in survival mode and I am stressed and overwhelmed and overcome with anxiety, then I have to take care of me first. It's always going to be me first, my needs, my wants, my desires, because my mind and my ego knows that one certainty of death. So our unconscious programming is self-preservation. For me to move beyond that, I have to make sure that I am in a state of wellness. That not only physically am I well and able, but mentally and emotionally I am clear, I am stable, I am still. So when I have an opportunity to extend that love beyond myself and care for someone else and see God in the eyes of an individual, even one that is coming at me, I have to know that I am in a place of homeostasis and balance so I could reprogram and move out of that survival instinct,
How does somebody do that or achieve that? Or let me probably rephrase it. What are some methods or the how-to in doing that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, yoga has a lot, but I had talking to you, Kern, and what's coming to mind is, I'm sure somebody comes into your clinic and they're in pain. And when they're in pain, they can't study nobody else, they're in pain. And then they leave your clinic and maybe they're more relaxed or they're easy. So now they could begin to serve something outside of themselves, right? I think yoga is also one of the ways in people do that. Just cultivating a relationship to one's mind. Now, a lot of people have resistance to yoga. So then, forget yoga. If you come and you access that through yoga, great. There's Tai Chi, there's Qigong, or get this, sitting with yourself and your breath. That's it. In yoga we have a teaching that says mind is king of everything. Meaning that mind is king of your entire perception and experience at any point in time. Really powerful. If I thought this table was blue, you can't convince me otherwise until I choose to believe otherwise, right? Sure. And as someone who has spent 10 days in silence and days in prolonged darkness, take it from me, your mind is more powerful than we could ever imagine.
10 days in silence?
10 days in silence, 3 days in darkness.
What is that, man? Talk to me about that.
But let's get to that. Let me finish this first.
Yeah.
Mind is king of everything, but breath is king of your mind. Breath is king of your mind. Breath is the one thing that can tame your mind. Your breath has the ability to reset your nervous system. Your breath has the ability to take your mind out of, his body out of fight and flight, calm anxiety, calm overwhelm. But the reality is that most people live their entire lives and have no idea how to breathe. And we tell people, breathe.
Saying, man, I breathe in right now.
Breathe.
How you can tell me I don't know how to breathe?
I learned to breathe at 27 years old. And that was 3 years after teaching yoga. And I still didn't know how to breathe.
But I breathe now.
Yeah. And I think the automatic breath that we know, cool, you'll breathe till you die. But when you cultivate an intentional relationship with your breath, it has the ability to dissolve anxiety, quiet your mind, lower your heart rate, reset your nervous system. Your breath is the biggest tool we have. The absolute most powerful thing we have is not even in mind. It's your breath.
Breath as a tool.
Breath as a tool.
To control the mind.
Yeah. I wouldn't say control because you don't want to control your partner. You want to be in relationship to your partner. You want to be in a holistic relationship with your mind, not control your mind. Your mind is not a bad thing, Your mind is not a bad thing. Your mind has its use, right? It crafts the human experience. But when you don't have a relationship with the mind, right? And this goes back to you asked a question earlier, what is meditation? And I look at meditation like this. It can be just sitting with your mind and your breath, but consider this. You have your mind and your breath are like two partners. Consider it like a marriage, right? Whether it be you and your mind or you and your breath. It's an eternal marriage. You cannot escape your mind. You cannot escape your breath. This is like your ride or die, right? So it's like a marriage with no separation and divorce. Now tell me something. If somebody is in a marriage or a relationship and they never spend time with their partner, they don't spend time to listen, they don't spend quality time together, there's no intimacy. Your partner is probably going to scream and shout and act out to get your attention. Mm-hmm. Or even a little child. If you neglect a child, they're going to start to act out to get your attention. Consider mind the very same way. Mind is the very same thing. If people want to begin to live from a place of more stillness, more calm, quiet in mind, well, spend time with the mind. Mm. Just sit with the mind, not with your cell phone, not with a book, not with Netflix. Sit with yourself. And most people can't sit with themselves. So how scary is that?
Ooh,
how scary is that?
Yeah.
When somebody tells me they cannot sit with themselves for 5 minutes, that is a scary thing. That means you are at war with yourself. So just, I invite people to look at the mind like a partner. It's like a lover. Just sit and get to know your mind. Set your phone for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Just sit with yourself. And when your mind starts to run like a mad person, look at your breath. Focus on your breath. Your breath is the one thing that can tame your mind. And the mind's going to run again. Sure, bring it back to your breath. And just when your mind does run, look and see where your mind is running. What is your mind running to? And just begin to inquire, why? What about that situation? What am I afraid of? And this is something I started to ask. You seem interested in 10 days of silence. This is what I learned in 10 days of silence. The first 5 days was absolute agony. Agony.
What you saying, man?
All I did was sit on a cushion with a group of people, sit, eat, sleep in absolute silence. No devices, no books, no pen, no paper, no nothing. And the first 5 days was agony.
Top tier yogi like you?
That was, yeah. Yoga is a practice. But even then, I threw myself in the deep end, right? And mind is a powerful thing. So yeah, yoga is a practice. It's not something you do, and you're never gonna get to a point where you don't need it anymore or you have it figured out. But what happened, and this is important as well, what happened in those first 5 days is, I'll tell you what was plaguing my mind. Girlfriend cheating on me, business going bankrupt, friends who were surfing, liming, having a good time while I was in my 20s sitting on a cushion wasting my life away. Somebody was going to die, and I wouldn't know, I wouldn't be able to tell them goodbye. Everything that was driven by fear was plaguing my mind. I was overcome by fear. And what happened was my breath got fast, my body started to ache. Because emotional body and the physical body are not separate, they're one. So when we're stressed and anxious and the mind is in a state of overcome by fear, your body begins to contract, right? So I felt physical aches in my body. I became depressed, I became sad. Then about halfway through, there's a guide of this experience. About halfway through, a guide said something that brought me to recognize that everything that was occupying my mind was driven by fear. Everything. And they were all narratives. They were all things my mind created.
Wow.
But I chose to believe them and feed them and have them dictate my experience. And the second I saw my thoughts and I acknowledged them and began to understand where they were coming from, I now had a relationship to them. And I wouldn't tell you they never came back. But when they did, I saw them, I understood them, and I knew that I had dedicated my life to live from a place of love. So when I see fear, I acknowledge it, and I choose to push it aside. And I've come to recognize that all your mind wants to do, like anybody else, is to be acknowledged, to be seen. And once we cultivate that relationship with the mind, it gets a lot quieter. It no longer needs to scream and shout to get our attention. It knows that it has something to offer, and it knows sometimes we'll listen and sometimes we'll call BS on it, you know?
And what that does is spill over into the physical, where it controls the organs, it down-regulates your heart, down-regulates the kidneys that produces adrenaline, it down-regulates your liver from producing extra enzymes and whatnot, and it puts you in a place of homeostasis. Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
You know, and I stick to that. Mind is king and breath is king of your mind. And if somebody were to cultivate or begin to cultivate a relationship to the mind through meditation or yoga or whatever you want to call it, and actually learn how to breathe and sit with the breath and the mind 5 minutes a day, change your life. Change your life.
Yeah, boy. So what you're saying is that instead of looking at governments and looking at institutions and looking at people to fix us, what we should really be doing is looking internally and looking at ourselves to really fix us.
Yeah.
And then from there, project that outwards. Yeah?
Yeah. Well, that's lasting change for sure, right? Now, I would never tell somebody. I believe that everyone should do whatever they could do, right? And the inner work is not easy work. That's hard work. That's real work, right? That's why it's easier for people to go to the moon and outer space than to sometimes sit in silence, right? And but I think, you know, whether it be on a personal level or a social level or a global level, we as individuals it needs to start from the inside. We need to look at, well, what state are we in? What state am I in? It's like a physical body. You have however million or billion cells in a physical body, right? If the cells within that body are not healthy, well, anybody's not going to be healthy. And I think each one of us, we have 8 billion people on the planet, we really have to, everything starts from the inside. Like that real lasting change has to happen on the inside. On a personal level, I have to look at my thoughts and my state of mind, my emotions, maybe even my spiritual body, to really have my physical body complete wellness. If not, my physical body might be well, but inside I in absolute turmoil. Well, what sense does that make? If you at war with yourself every day, but you have 6-pack abs, you know what I mean? What sense is that? And so I think both need to go hand in hand. And I think on a social level, we also need to, I'm not saying the government can't make a change and a big scope of things can't make change, of course, and it has to. But we can't just leave it to that. We need to also do the work ourselves to see, well, what are we contributing to this society, you know? And it goes with every single interaction we have on a daily basis, where we can make people feel safe, seen, understood, valued, appreciated, cared for.
It's funny you say that. You know, I had a guest on this podcast, and you know, we spoke about some of the gangs and some of the gang violence that was happening, and one of the topics we kind of glanced over was change, and how do we create that meaningful change, and who drives that change. And it was so, oh my gosh, it was so overwhelming, the amount of work that we need to actually do, that you thought of, my gosh, are we even making an impact? How can we make an impact? Does it even make sense to do something to try and make an impact, you know? But based on what you're saying, don't try to change the world, but impact the people who you meet on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, Kern, you know, like we don't realize how powerful we are, and we love to say, yeah, I powerful, my power. But a social media post can change someone's life.
Yeah.
The smallest of things can change
This
someone's
podcast
life.
could change
This
someone's
podcast
life.
will change somebody's life.
Yeah.
And here's the thing too, is that, you know, we often look at, when we look at like that question, how am I changing the world? Somebody might say, yeah, well, I do this, and this to make the world better. Cool. But do you have the courage to look at the things you do that have a negative impact on the world? That's the real work. Can we look at our own darkness and our own shadow and bring light to that? Because it's one thing for me to say, I do these things that make the world better, but then I not see any 50 things I do and make the world worse.
Gotcha.
You know, and I tell a story once, a teacher of mine, Sean Korn, she looked at me one day and she said, you are a reason for everything that is wrong in this world.
Whoa.
And I sat there and I was like, this is my teacher, my mentor. And she knew everything I was doing to make the world better. And I sat there in absolute disbelief. I was like, what? I was broken. And then I began to understand that she was right. Because, you know, I believe in collective consciousness. And I imagine that everything I do means that it's okay for somebody else to do it. So if I do something, it's like a like, a click, and a share, like what I call a cosmic algorithm for somebody else to do it. So if I do something, that's a like for that to go viral, right? So I now have to look at really how I show up every day in the world. For example, if I walk past a hungry man on the street and he wants food, and maybe I have money in my pocket, maybe I eat in a portion of fries or something, air fried, of course. But whatever that is, right? If I choose not to feed that man, that's a vote for world hunger, starvation, poverty. If I can assist and I choose not to, maybe because I go into a bank to cash my check, or I go into my job, or I go into my car, or my comfy home, and I neglect my ability to feed that man, then that's a vote for starvation, hunger, and poverty.
But you're putting real pressure on yourself, man.
Yeah, but here's I agree, and it's not but when we come to acknowledge our power, that comes with the responsibility. Now, don't get me wrong, I do that all the time. I do that all the time. So it's not like I beating myself up all the time over these things. No, but I recognize it. And I know it comes back to the fact that why I say I connect to this man called Christ in a way that maybe it's not portrayed through religion or a box of the established one, is that I believe one of his greatest teachings, it was in Luke, I want to say Luke 14 or Luke 21. You will do far greater things than I have ever done. Why are we not talking about that? We're talking about we're born into sin. We're sinners. We're not talking about Christ instructed us. He told us that we have the ability to do far greater things than he has ever done. And as far off as that might seem for me, I hope I live it every day for the rest of my life trying.
Yeah, man. Respect for that. So, tell me about this book.
Yeah.
Tell me how this book came about, and, you know, Love. My Name is Love by Troy Hadeed. Tell me
Yeah,
how
don't
that
forget
came
the
out.
last line too.
We're not all that different, if you haven't seen.
Yeah, true.
Tell me how this came about.
Well, the first time I knew I was going to write a book, I was 19. And I was with my girlfriend at the time, and I dipped my hand in my pocket and pulled out a piece of popcorn. We used to go to movies all the time. And I said, and I love popcorn, so I ate it still like a week old, right? And I said, popcorn in my pocket, that's going to be the name of my first book. And I knew I was going to write a book one day. And I tried many times, probably over the last decade. And I feel like it just wasn't ready. It wasn't ready. And funny enough, when I went to university, I told my dad, I was like, listen, I'm not going to work in family business. If you don't want to send me to school, that's cool. I understand. He's like, yes, send you to school. I said, cool, well, I want to study philosophy and writing. He said, no way, you're going to do business. So 20 years later, here I am and pretty much write a book that is a lot of philosophy. But I think I knew all along I was going to write a book, and I tried many times. And this last time, clearly, which was just before COVID, I am thankfully that time gave me more time to write. But I sat down and it just came. I don't know where it came from, but it came. And up until, and it didn't stop. And I sat and I would write for about 4 or 5 hours every day because I had time, right?
Yeah.
And up till right before it was published, it was still called Popcorn in My Pocket.
Yeah.
And thanks to some, my local editor, Anu Lakan, who's amazing, and some other local authors, Ira Mantura, Amanda Smythe, and the accidental taking of this photo, the name of the book changed and everything changed, you know. And it's so funny that one of the things when the book began that I said, I absolutely knew for certain was not going to happen was my face on the cover. And
total opposite here.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that I really had to overcome my ego in a lot of ways to put my face on the cover because I was concerned. Well, one, it wasn't a book about me. I didn't want it to be a book about me. And then I didn't want to be a guy who put his face on the cover of his book. But very, very quickly I had to recognize that I didn't have a say in the matter, that there were certain things that were happening and this just had to happen and that's how it was going to be. And I remember when I first saw that photo as well, I looked at it and I didn't know who I was looking at. Because I feel like something was captured in that photo, a part of myself that I had never met before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How can someone get this book?
It is on Amazon, of course. Amazon, it's also locally, it's sold in paper-based bookshop. It's sold in RIK. And it will be on Food Drop very soon.
On Food Drop?
Yeah, I'm going to change it up a little bit, shake it up, go to different avenues. Of course, at Beyond Yoga as well, it's available.
So how can someone partake, or how can they work with you during yoga or do yoga with you?
Yeah.
How are they able to do that?
Well, a yoga studio is on Ryson Road, right by your clinic as well, right behind Dwellings, and it's Beyond Yoga Studio, and we have classes, 2 or 3 classes a day. While I don't teach them all, they are amazing teachers as well. And if somebody wants to work one-on-one with me, that is something I do, whether it be yoga practice, breathing, what I call perspective coaching, or just talking about life and philosophy and God. However, someone wants to work one-on-one, that is an option as well. Yeah. And if they go to my Instagram or my website, troyhadeed.com, there is a link for free introductory call, and somebody's interested, we could have a call, and if it feels like a fit, great. And if not, I'll just guide them the best I can, you know?
Yeah. Troy, I want to thank you so much for joining me on You and Wellness. I want to thank you so much for the conversation. I want to thank you so much for your time and spending some time here on You and Wellness.
Yeah, you too,
my
brother. I love it.
Blessings, man.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, man. Thank you for joining us on another episode of You and Wellness. We are sitting here with Troy Hadeed, author, yogi, and an amazing person. Yeah, good. Deuces, guys.